Thank you. First of all, thank you for the introduction. I'm Tincuta Heinzel. I'm senior lecturer at Loughborough University in UK. And I'm here with Maria Mandea from University of Film and Theatre in Bucharest, Dana Diminescu from Institut Polytechnique Paris, Narcis Tulbure, who's teaching the Academy of Economic Sciences in Bucharest. And that's actually a mistake on the introduction. There were actually some of our colleagues who are here more or less virtually, I would say. It is also Ioana Macrea-Toma, who's researching at OSA Archives in Bucharest, Lasse Scherffig, who's teaching at KIST in Cologne. And it was supposed to have also Yanina Prudenko, who's living now in Moscow, and Constatin Vică, who in the end did it. Yeah, they are ghosts in this presentation. So we would like to introduce you to the planning game, which is a project who started. I'm going to do a little bit the big framework, I would say. Then we'll go much more in some other quickly in the details, because yeah, that's a lot to say and do. So the planning game, it's a game we conceived, me, Maria and Narcis, in the frame of another project which is called Utopian Cities and Programmed Societies. And it's a project, as mentioned to you, there are several people involved, and we are going to present both online or record it, because it was not possible online because of the live stream. We are going to speak about a short introduction of Utopian Cities, Programmed Societies, briefly introduce somehow historical backgrounds, with the small fragments from a text from Yanina Prudenko on Soviet cybernetics, and large-scale unit of information, USSR. And then Narcis will speak also about this influence in how the socialist countries' economy were more or less designed or supposed ideally to work. Me and Maria will speak about the planning game, the project itself we are presenting today, and then Lasse will somehow introduce what's relevant in still looking into this kind of archaeology of archive and cybernetics nowadays, why it's important to look back and how actually to use that today. And of course that's open to discussions and questions in the end. And I would like now to invite Dana a little bit to speak about our project. We started in 2019. It was somehow also kind of encounters. We had meetings, talks, discussions, visited Victoria. And this is how, in the end, the project Utopian Cities, Programmed Societies born. And the idea was actually to look a little bit in this kind of utopian nature of design, architecture, technologies as well, and to look from this kind of utopian or sometimes ideological perspectives, and to look at what's left after once the things are built, and actually how to deal with this the way we built our environment, and how exactly we live with, and how to continues after that, to reflect and continues living with that. And I would like to invite Dana now to talk a little bit about our project, because there were two, it was a biannual project. The first one took place in 2019, just before the COVID. It took place in the town of Victoria, in Romania, near Brașov, Victoria meaning victory. And it was a town built from scratch in the 1950s. And I'm going to let Dana to speak about it. And the second year was supposed to be about cybernetics, to go into this kind of analyzing the patterns of imagine how actually the cybernetic has been used, what exactly it's in the technologies that were put at work in this kind of environments, utopian environments. And unfortunately, COVID came, so that a lot of our plans were have to be changed or improvised or adapted. Some of us were present, like Maria. Some of us contributed online. Some of us contributed in person. So there were different forms of involvement, I would say, in the second part of the project. And we are going to more or less cover both of them. And we're going to speak also about the planning game, and reflect a little bit how this might help us to launch a discussion for today related about data, cybernetics, and AI. Dana, if you'd like to speak about Victoria. It's a very nice picture behind.
Listen, I can speak hours and hours. I will be very quickly to tell you only that this city was built to give the possibility that the new man born, the new very Marxist society born in the city, and it was a city who must stay all the time young. Image that 30 years they didn't make a cemetery to preserve this propaganda for a young city. It was a city without archive because it's born on nothing, on earth, and they called it in the newspaper the city without archive. It was a city without church because the new man must be athée. And I must say that I born in this city and I lived there 80 years. And in fact, that brings this city in our project, especially that I realized that I live in this city in an apnea. I didn't respirer. J'ai pas respiré. And in a very aveugle manière. So my question was how the other people live this utopian prescription, and the contribution of everybody bring me the film what I didn't want to see between 20 years when I lived there. My methodology is sociologist, so I make a lot of inventory, I find a lot of archive, but also a little like situationist. So I go in derive and I try to bring out a monograph in derive of this city, I hope so, in some years, because it takes time. So I will stop here. But I'm open if you have questions, because I think maybe you have. Who is the next?
Yeah, no, it's, it's something somehow you forgot. It's about a town which is settled at the basis of Carpathians, a very Draculesque kind of imagery as well. And it's something you also, town of migration nowadays, as you... you wanted to speak about that.
I didn't want it, but you know, the society, the state, and the bureaucratical state produce this utopia of the new man and how to control the fecundity and control what you must say and you must love and so on. And I realized, making interviews, that people from Victoria produce another utopia. And at the same time, they wanted to run away. And they think that in other places, out of the border, it will be better. And it was very interesting to see how they build this immigration project. They immigrate after '89. And what is more interesting, that the third generation comes back, and they use the language used by the Communist Party before, because they are inspired by the YouTube videos who show this society, what they never experienced. And they say it was very good, that Ceausescu was Père Noël, and so on. And it's very interesting to see how artificial intelligence, because the machine learning, they know it's act, they see what they see, and they bring you what you already have see. So c'est au fond l'intelligence artificielle qui fait que.
It's the artificial intelligence that drives people back to the town based on the initial utopia. So there is a circle that starts with a utopia nobody believed in, and then another utopia is built whereby people migrate, and then their children come back because artificial intelligence makes this utopia credible. This is a kind of interpretation.
Yeah, it's a feedback. It's round. No, it's about the story imaginaries that drive our lives, and actually how we deal with that. And maybe we might also say briefly about what happened in 2019. So that was yeah. So it was a summer camp that took place with students from different 4 different actually art schools in Europe, and they were invited somehow to an artist, RIBN. You can see there they were, it's a French group from, certainly those in Paris know them very well. So there was a series of interventions in town. We created this journal, Utopian Cities, Program Societies. And this might be retrieved as a version of zine, we make it together, we participate in, put together. Maria's one of the designers, but there were a lot of the designers in the end, so that there are still small things to adjust to make it perfect. And here are some examples of interventions. This was a part of a visit we did. It probably something we also forgot to say about Victoria, that it's a town actually who started.
Very regulated and chemical, which makes a lot of boom boom.
No, it's a town who actually was built around a factory, munition factory, during the Second World War. It started like that, but because they were lacking people, the villagers around were not enough to support the big industry. So one of the reasons actually to build this, beyond the utopia and the form that this town took, was actually to bring the people there to work in this factory, munition factory. A factory has been established during the Second World War. But was still functional at the time and has been developed and make it bigger and somehow, yeah. And this is one of the intervention in that visit. We have done it to this munition factory. And then in the second year, we also try to discuss a little bit what exactly we're speaking about economy. Speaking also about the social relationships and the fact that we try to control, there was this attempt to control the social relationship and so on. The attempts to speak about cybernetics and control in Eastern Europe. And we have both more or less theoretical and applied considerations, theoretical perspective and applied considerations. So they were like questions we had, which were the premises of cybernetics in Eastern Europe, what was at stake when it comes to cybernetics, and to speak about cybernetics and economy, cybernetics and urbanism. Ioana Macrea-Toma, at some point, she wanted to speak about the case of Mihai Botez, who was a Romanian mathematician. And one of our colleagues also spoke about these science fictions, for example, stories related to cybernetics and peasant life, which probably it's also interesting to connect with this much more biological perspective. And this kind of contribution were much more theoretical, and as said, because of the COVID, it was much more difficult actually to organize it as an event. It was an event in the end. It was an exhibition at Timișoara in the frame of a Simultan Festival, and later on at Cluj. For this second round, there were participants like Ioana Craiovanu, Lasse Scherffig, super serious, Anca Băduț and Céline Berger, Constatin Vică, Gabriel Troc, Miklos Onuksan, Yanina Prudenko, Narcis Tulbure, myself, Susanna Schoenberg, Mihai Ioanel, and Ioana Macrea-Toma. And this was, for example, one of the interventions we've done at Timișoara with Super Serious, the system in the room and the faces of the city, where we were trying, for example, to take some theories from hypotheses about how to speak or to think about the urbanism. And then we develop a game as a way to address the critical aspects nowadays in urbanism and planning in Romania. All this kind of old, how to connect the old stories and the present stories. It's actually intervention Maria and Anca Băduț, Super Serious Anca Băduț have done.
Super Serious is a collective that I'm part of, an artist collective that has architects and urban planners.
Yeah.
And we work with games a lot, urban games. So
yeah. And this was another intervention. It was somehow trying to speak about this kind of relationships this might create in the society. I invited Miklos Onuksan, who's one of the artists who in the 1980s create, for example, this kind of fluxus small events. Into the first photo is taken in the 1980s, where he, as a designer in a factory, was speaking. It's here, I'm coming every morning. So I wanted to learn more about what exactly does it mean for a designer to work in a factory, to be an artist into a factory, and how he might relate to this position of the artist in the society, or the image that an artist or a designer. That was actually the original, I would say, index term for the designers, the artists in industry. And the replica he gave in 2020 was, it is here, I'm leaving from every morning, and it's a photo he took in front of his house, his door house, changing a little bit the perspectives and trying to position himself both post and after 89. And these are also some examples. It was our colleague Mihai Vanel who was presenting some history of science fiction literature. And we also invited Yanina Prudenko, who wrote a book on the Soviet economy and Soviet cybernetics as a lack of large-scale unit of information in USSR. It's an attempt to look into archives, Soviet archives, to retrace the history of cybernetics in arts. This is a small attempt of what is there and how exactly we work with data, and I think this allowed us to introduce Narcis to speak about data. And give it you the.
Okay, so I think it works. I feel a bit strange because I'm an economist and anthropologist by training, so I'm for the first time at a conference done by artists and then for artists, but I hope what I have to say will make sense a bit. What I'm presenting here is some other threads that fed into the game project. I joined the team of the project a bit late in the dystopian phase, right? So in the post-utopian phase after Victoria, and we were focusing mostly on cybernetics and what cybernetics is in economics, in arts, in urban planning, and so on. My approach was coming from a previous research on data and what I define as data poverty. The title of my presentation was Data Poverty Across Economies. And data poverty can refer to any of those concepts on the web of concepts in there, depending on context. So poverty, precarity can refer to false data, secret data, inaccessible data, concealed, synthetic, raw, at some points fixated, and so on and so forth. So this is just a map of concepts that will help you grasp some of the nuances of what I want to convey in here. That was so that was part of the project, reflecting on the conditions of possibility of knowledge about the economy created under socialism in Eastern Europe, and especially so in Romania, in contrast to some other societies. There are societies that were rather closed, such as the Soviet Union or Romania. I think it would be the most extreme case where you don't really have significant contributions to economics or to central planning or something that was circulating within the area or even in the West, and something that would be worth citing. On the other hand, in contrast, you have societies such as Hungary, Poland, Yugoslavia, and so on, where there were some economic theories being elaborated at the time on the sui generis types of economies, and being referenced and circulating and so on. So my question was, why not in Romania? Why don't you have something like that? So we had the sophisticated people, we had the mathematicians working on cybernetics or on mathematics and economics. We had journals and scientific conferences and circulation of knowledge and so on. So what I could understand was that the data was severely controlled in Romania, and that it made it impossible to write any sort of empirical economic science. So most of it was just mathematical exercises, proofs of theorems and translations of models, but nothing that could be tested against data, any sort of data. And hence the concept of data poverty. And the second thread that I also tried to contribute to the project of the game itself was, how was that data precarity or the scarcity of data shaping the central planning exercise. As you might know, Soviet economies, socialist economies in Eastern Europe were big on central planning. They were run by central planning, right? So for some it worked, some others implemented more flexible systems of economic management, such as in Yugoslavia and later on in Hungary, for instance, in the 1980s, whereas some became more and more autarkic and more centered on central planning, and the paradox was that they became more and more autarkic the less central planning used to work. And that is again the case of Romania. And again we try to understand why central planning didn't work in Romania, although it was a centralized, politically a very centralized society. And again, because of the data, the missing data or the control of the data, I also have some concepts that or definitions of the concept that I operate with. Maybe I'm going to read them, although they're not the most important one and maybe difficult to follow. So by precarious data, I refer to both scarce, unreliable, inconsistent, doctored, secret, synthetic, whatever you might call it. Remember the web of concepts, data that make economic and political analysis hard to perform. But also, maybe less intuitively, to contexts where data has been thoroughly processed and simplified to the form of indices in order to support specific theoretically driven models, and that would be kind of okay, or more importantly, ideologically inspired narratives. So data was worked and reworked and so on, made synthetic from raw data in order to support the ideological claims and narratives of the party, and that's one of the claims I make. Also, data poor economies are those that excessively reduce the diversity of data, making them too theoretical and permanent at the expense of their practical temporariness, right? So when I coined the concept of data poverty, I was having in mind attempts by people working, for instance, at the Fed, the Federal Reserve in the United States, like Ben Bernstein, right, that talks about the abundance of data, having econometric models with so many equations, thousands of equations, and so many data series, and data that is always being revised and updated and so on. So they have to deal with the problem of an abundance of data and then have to specify models that are robust at such changes in data. In contrast to that, I think that the central planners in Romania were facing an opposite problem. They were working with little data, with data that was worked on and simplified and transformed into indices, so that the diversity of the data, which is something to be valued from a statistical point of view, because statistical models have to work on those residuals, right? You're left with no statistical information. Everything is made deterministic and according to the party narratives, right? So this is what I call data poverty. Economies that have access to data that it's almost useful for planning or for research, and that comes through over-standardization of data. Now I have also a question for you here. What is the ideal shoe like? These are examples of commercials from the socialist period for the shoe making factories or for the shoes produced by the socialist industry. And the question, I mean, there are some hints in there, but neither of those suggestions is the right one. So what is the ideal shoe? The question, the answer to that question will also reveal something about data, paradoxically. In Romania, until I give you the response to that question, I have to tell you, maybe to give you some insight, that macroeconomically, Romania produced statistical data according to the material product system, which was a Marxist-Leninist-inspired ideological framework in which, for instance, only material production was counted as a product of society, whereas services were mostly left outside. And that came in contrast with the system of national accounts, which most of you should be somehow familiar with, for instance, about concepts such as GDP or GNP and something like that, are concepts from the system of national accounts, right? And then during the Cold War, the two ideological blocks were operating with these contrasting systems of macroeconomic statistics, right? And statisticians in Romania would have to participate in conferences both within the Comecon, so within the Conference of Socialist Societies, in which they would work on the procedures of the material product system, but also in taking part in translation exercises across the Iron Curtain, in which they would translate categories of the material product system into system of national accounts categories and the reverse, trying to make, you know, product comparable in a sense, the performance of economies translatable, understandable from one ideological block to the other. And that was not easy because of methodological and conceptual barriers, but also because of the practices, and this is where my anthropological self came into practice, because of the practices of those people. And I have a quotation from an interview with one of the representatives of the Central Direction of Statistics in Romania that explained to me how things happened at the Conference of European Statisticians when they were trying to translate between categories, right? So I quote, "During the 1980s, we used to calculate the domestic output based on the system of national accounts, on the Western system methodology, but just before the Conference of European Statisticians, we always withdrew the data, motivating that our estimates are inconsistent or any such reason. We faced a practical problem at the time. We wanted our economy to be like the ideal shoe," hence the response, "large on the inside and small on the outside." Apparently, this is the aesthetic of the ideal shoe. "For ideological reasons, we wanted the economy to appear large as the internal legitimacy of the party depended on that. But for practical reasons, such as estimating the contribution to the IMF, which was based on the size of the GDP, as well as all the other advantages associated with the status of a developing country, which Romania had at the time. If I'm running out of time, just let me know. We wanted the economy to appear not that large, and we couldn't decide what to do." So hence the conundrum in there. Statistical data was subject to secrecy, which was not only inscribed in laws, so there were comprehensive laws about secrecy, about which information is accessible to the public, which kind of data is secret, and what are the categories of secrecy, from on-the-job related secrets to state secrets and so on, but also practices of monitoring access to data and practices involving data and so on.
It would be nice to somehow make the switch also to the game and to explain why exactly
to the game now. So I'm fast forwarding to the game. So coming from that perspective, we try to basically, and I'm not going to take more than 2 minutes. With that, we try to replicate. So first of all, we were trying to discuss among ourselves what was cybernetics and how was it conditioned by data and the precarity of data and so on. And that kind of didn't make sense and didn't go through well, my message, for instance, based on research in the archives. And then we came up with this idea to create a game, actually, to enact the practices of those involved in central planning and reporting and statistical reporting and monitoring of the plan and so on. And then to reconstitute in practice, in a sense, the tensions between the three categories which were key to economic central planning, which was the planned values, so the figures of the plan, the realized, which was something that only factory managers had access to information about that, and the reported, which was what they were reporting to the statistical authorities or to the political authorities and claiming the overcoming of the plan and so on and so forth. So there was always a tension between these three categories, and given the dynamic nature of economic planning, there was a 5-year economic planning being created that gave birth to very interesting dynamics, right? So we wanted to, in a sense, reconstitute those and then make it more, make it easier for the audience, but also for those participants in the game to understand, the tensions of central planning. So trying to engage the audience and then to make the audience play the game of central planning in order to understand it better. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to be happy to intervene in the questions section if necessary. Thank you.
Yeah, it's very much because I was very briefly what that Yanina Prudenko was also citing, for example, Boris Groys. It's about also this attempt to all the time to put yourself to be an actor into the system, and in the same time to somehow reflect on what exactly that might have an impact in your own life and how exactly we have to deal with that, and to trying to as an attempt as a thing with our data today and how exactly those are collected and what's happening with those data. So Maria, if you we might start together. So how exactly we start? We started with this kind of attempt to replicate the statistician's role in the Romanian economy to see how much data we might get, and how exactly this is actually manipulated, how exactly this manipulation were happening. And Maria, we might also speak about the, can we have it there? And how exactly to recreate this kind of experience of playing economic games and collecting data, and how we declare and what's happening with that.
Well, first of all, I have to say I've been working with games as an art form for a few years now, and I also teach game design. So for me, the problem is how do we transform this data-driven theory and these economical concepts into an experience? Because actually the game, or games in general, are very good at creating situations to show human relations, mistakes, biases, things that aren't really that easy to find in economical models, simulations or such. And also games are focused more on the process than the outcome, as well, in a society that's driven by efficiency and productivity, there's something that isn't that productive. It's more about enjoyment or playfulness. So we started with an analog game to see how it works, like the economical model, and what's fun about it and what it's not. And as you can imagine, probably at first it wasn't that fun because it was data and mathematics, and yeah, you don't really want to do that in a game. One thing was working analog and tangible and very hands-on allowed us to make alterations very quickly. And also it allowed the game to be slower, to simplify it, to show the concepts, in order for them to be understood by someone who isn't that well,
Economist.
Yeah, an economist or someone who is familiar with these concepts. And also games tend to emphasize decision making, so that was also very important for us during the iterations. We had some roles in the game that were based on real roles in the socialist economies, and each player would get one card, like this, and they would try to act as that character. Here we were figuring out relations between characters as they were in real life, but as we had to simplify them for the game. So most of the players are factory managers. They play as factory managers. And there are 3 factory managers for each county and also 3 factory managers for each industry. We started with the textile industry and added, I think, the chemical industry and...
Yeah, we were trying to somehow make the interconnection between these different industries and try to understand what would be the role and how exactly, given the plans, what will be the, I would say, what is requested as kind of charge, the roles to accomplish, and what exactly might happen. There were small accidents that might happen, and how exactly we might relate to I would say the resources and the events, and a very actor network, I would say, theory related aspects somehow.
Yeah. So each player that was a factory manager would get a plan that they would have to realize by the end of the year, and there were 5 years during which they could declare or not that they made the plan or that they exceeded it or whatever. And then we also had like the next layer, next level, that were the ministries of industry. So for each industry you had one minister and one county party secretary, so the political part, for three cards. So you get like the purple, the blue, and the orange. And then there was a special character that was the central planner, who decides the plan for each year and for each factory. So that then the factory managers would have to declare if they exceeded it or they would have to lie. Then we have the statistician who collects the data. And also who talks to the central planner and also the political authority, that's next. And the political authority, that's again a special character who audits players at the end of each year, eliminates the players who they found have lied. So you have the
moral incest
to lie, but if you get caught, you're out of the game. So, and they also award the one who declared the most to be the hero of socialist work. And we have like this losing condition that. If you get caught, you get eliminated. But and also, so it's based on this type of lying, and also a winning condition that's you have to first of all survive, and then you have to be the one who managed the most productivity in your
and as proved during our iteration, I also was trying to see what's happening if you don't particularly everybody's expecting, or that was the theory, that everybody's lying, saying more just to add to numbers to the plan. What's happening actually when you declare less and you keep the reserves for you, and
you can actually
trying to introduce a kind of new profiles into this kind of theory about how the socialist industry was working. So
the way people act, it was something that we could actually experience during the game. The way people act by having this incentive to declare more, but also to hide their outcome so that they don't get caught later. And there were players who declared more or players who declared less. Each one had one strategy, and you could also make your strategy in relation to what you saw that the other players were doing, and you could also discuss with them, of course. And as time and actually years in the game went by, the lies would build up on top of each other, so then you would get like this super high number that was completely false
or unrealistic.
Yeah. So then maybe the next step was to go from analog to digital in small steps. So we use this really advanced game engine that's called Excel, or actually Google Slides, or no, Google Sheets. Because we're dealing with economics, so it works. And it eliminated a lot of, I don't know, note-taking and calculus. Maybe we will, in the future, make it even more digital. So we are planning on doing more iterations. So in terms of possibilities for the game can model human relations, and I think this is its most why it's very relevant for this type of research. And we can also see how this type of I don't know, planned society that was relevant 30, 40 years ago, how is it relevant for today's players?
It's more or less a pedagogical, what we said with Narcis. It's about learning about the history of economics. It's about learning about this kind of interaction that might happen, and trying to learning live actually what might happen, what kind of, also to play between scales, because it's about macro and micro scales of economics. It's about games. It's already part of the economic theory. So it's not. It's a way to bring alterities of these kind of economic models, which already are discussed and addressed in a way, trying to show, oh, this was in the past. This was what was happening, and let's see what would be actually, if we correct some of the aspects, what exactly is happening or might happen nowadays.
I think we should also add that there were 18 players that would have to play the game, but we devised these smaller versions. But usually, like, you would use it as a pedagogical tool, maybe with students who try to learn about these types of economics, or larger groups of people who want to play it.
Or even to show this kind of how the data might be manipulated. What's the difference between the discourse and what's happening in the practice, and trying to for the players actually to imagine this kind of different aspects.
But there are also limitations to games. So I think what I noticed the most in most games, and this one included, is that a game cannot be dogmatic. So you cannot have a thesis that you tell your players and they will execute it. It's more about creating a debate, a space for debate on a certain topic and learning about it. And you really can create the context for that. So the context of the planned economy, but probably the planned economy as a context will not play as it would have played in the 80s, for example, because there are different players, and usually with the same game and different set of players,
we are much more complex nowadays.
Yeah, you have, and you're creating actually situations that players can actually project their own biases and their own ideas and opinions, and actually maybe even if we have any opinion about planned economies, they may have a very different one, and I think that's completely okay and very, very interesting to see different.
They're not repercussion in real life, so that's not really. It's still a game. We can.
Yeah.
If I can just add to that, it's even better than that. I mean, you don't have to tell them, what's the purpose of the game, and then they replicate it. You actually keep them uninformed about that, and they prove your thesis, right? Because the game that we played resulted in a consistent difference between the reported and the realized. Because at the end of the game, we actually summed up what they managed to realize based on some simple mathematical functions, which we implemented in Excel because it was easier at some point for the players to simply have a formula, and what they had reported and the number of points they got for that. So there was a discrepancy, a consistent discrepancy between realized and reported. and of course everything differed from planned, and that actually proved the thesis that we elaborated in the research phase, right? Given the incentive structure that you place in such an economy, deception will be the outcome, not because of the lack of honesty of the players, just because of the strategizing that goes into the playing of the game. And that was, in a sense, our purpose, right? And through digitalizing the game, we can increase the number of iterations, so make people play it more and more often in different other settings, and also make the game more plastic in a sense by shifting the incentive structures, the organization structure of the game, and thus conduct sort of micro experiments, right, to see which sort of institutional structures are inducive of more deception, of more lying, versus which ones are conducive of honesty and so on. So that's in a sense what we want to do, because obviously, I mean, we worked on the socialist economy, but you can imagine the multi-year budgeting process of a global corporation nowadays. You can think about the system of merits and rankings within universities and academic evaluation processes, and a little bit of strategizing goes into all of those processes. So our aim is to expand. I'm going to stop here.
But also, I have to acknowledge that it's not the players' roles. They're very important. They're almost co-authors of the game. That's the event in that sense. So yeah, some of them proved our theories, and some of them don't. So it depends on the players very much what kind of outcome you have and their opinions. So I think they have to be acknowledged that they're not just pawns in our scheme.
And just because I think we are also in some time limits, and we actually wanted to launch a dialogue with you, it's last intervention, it's Lasse Scherffig on cybernetic artificial intelligence and alchemy.
I think we have to press play again.
Hi, I'm Lasse. I'm in the audience right now, watching myself talking about cybernetics and an archaeology of cyber. Hi, I'm Lasse. I'm in the audience right now, watching myself talking about cybernetics and an archaeology of cybernetics, and I hope I will be available for the discussion later. So what I want to talk about today is, to me it seems that cybernetic thought has sort of a renaissance right now in different realms, one of them being the area of economy and society, where ideas of a real-time planning economy are coming back, something that's originally tried in Chile in the famous CyberSyn project, for instance. And on the other hand, in contemporary artificial intelligence, we see a return to the very core technical methods of cybernetics. So AI, you could say, is becoming cybernetics in everything but the name. And even though there is a lot of this renaissance is about metaphors, is about using cybernetic language and ideas in other areas, I've always been interested in the technological core of how early cybernetics came into being, and that core is what we are looking at here right now. This is a block diagram from the 50s showing how the output of a system is being measured and fed back into the system in order to be compared negatively to an input setting, a goal, and then the output that has been measured before is being used to optimize or to minimize the error of the output in the future. This is of interest here because it makes clear that from the point of view of a cybernetic system, everything that counts is the relationship between its effectors and its sensors, E and S in this diagram. How does the actions of this system change what the system can see through its sensors about the outside world? And this relationship and its comparison is used to steer the system towards a goal by minimizing an error. And Heinz von Förster has early pointed out that from the point of view of the system, this implies that the outside world doesn't really exist, right? Because it's only accessible through the relationship of effector and sensor. It's only accessible by being part of how the actions of a system change what it can read about the world. So the world becomes a part of the system, it becomes an insight, and everything that is known about the world and controllable of the world is inside the system, if you will, which gives us a very clear idea, I think, about the limits of cybernetic control, especially if we talk about things like societal and economic control, because really only those things are visible, accessible, and controllable that are formulated in terms of effectors and pre-formulated, you could say, in terms of effectors, sensors, and goals, meaning that the idea of especially societal control through cybernetic system automatically becomes kind of a dystopian one. You could say this all doesn't matter though, because contemporary discourse is way ahead of that. We now have artificial intelligence. We don't do cybernetics anymore. The proponents of artificial intelligence already in the 50s made clear that they want to be associated with cybernetics at all. They did invent the terms artificial intelligence to get away from cybernetics, if you will, which is kind of interesting. Especially because contemporary artificial intelligence is, as you probably know, largely based on so-called neural networks that learn minimizing an error signal in order to establish a statistical representation of the input data. And this is, as you may know, Norbert Wiener, when he invented the term cybernetics, the narrative he gave us was that he was working on the anti-aircraft problem, which is shooting a bullet at an airplane so that bullet and plane come together in the future, which means predicting the behavior of the plane. And his solution was building a statistical model of the behavior of the plane, one that doesn't know about the physics of the plane and the intentions of the pilot, but only the statistics of its behavior, and building that model by minimizing a prediction error over time. And this is pretty much identical to what contemporary artificial intelligence is doing, where connectionist systems like neural architectures, neural networks, are minimizing output error, which are nowadays called loss, against a goal, which most of the time is something like an example. And this general setup and this focus on building statistical models through prediction and minimization of error, I would say, is a very, very clear return to early cybernetics, not in metaphor, but in practices and technologies, really. So when Jean-François Dupuy 20 years ago said that the ideas of cybernetics were good ones, even though they may not have been true, they give us an idea of what's going on in artificial intelligence, including ideas of controlling economy and society through AI right now, because technologically or conceptually, we are still tied into the very, very early models of feedback control theory that early cybernetics was dealing with. In the first place.
Yeah, I was curious about the replayability of the game, and if you had the chance to replay the game with the same group of people, and if after they learned the game from start to end, did this change their behavior in any way, or
we
strategy?
didn't play with the same group of people, but well, at first you get this learning phase, learning curve that and then maybe probably like the second stage of the game goes much faster because you already know how it works. So I would imagine that in like a second play with the same people, which I think it's not that likely because you have 18 players.
Yeah, we also we tested in a very small group. Actually, it was not really. Ideally, we said we should have 20 or something, but we were trying this in a smaller group just to see a first round how. So we might imagine that it's adaptable also different scales. It might be smaller or bigger groups. So yeah,
but also because it works as a tool. I think we didn't focus that much on replayability as you would with a commercial game.
Yeah, so it was a 5-year plan. So there were 5 iterations to the game. So obviously they learned and then they talked to each other in the game and they learned from each other. And then we had a session in the end in which they reflected on the game and their experiences. And then they provided us feedback on how to improve the game, including making it digital, because apparently for people, some of which came from medical school and things like that. So we didn't want economists to play the game, right? So they said, okay, so it's kind of tedious to ask us to calculate our production functions and then to do the accounting of the game and so on. So why don't you digitalize that and then make it automatic? So we just focus on strategizing.
Excuse me. I have a slightly different question, which is really a discussion topic. I heard a talk by a man called Daniel Boorstin about 50 years ago. And he made this simple statement that we've gone from a world that was meaning rich and data poor to one that is data rich and meaning poor. Listening to you, I think we are numerologists. You just said someone was numerate. Okay, great for them. So maybe we need to put in our head and think about 100 years from now, what is the meaning of what you're doing? And, planning games have existed since humans existed, all right? The winner of the game gets to play again. It's a plan. So what is the meaning of all of this excitement about cybernetics and data?
So we have, as I said, it's part of my bigger project. Now we come back to utopian cities and program societies. Is to reflect on what we have built so far, how we experience this now in everyday life, and what might be also the future, and how we imagine ourselves in the future, based on the already existing experiences. And the fact that we choose somehow Victoria, which is a kind of new laboratory life, more or less, human scale, then that would be actually that's how we have to see the game.
So what do you imagine we will be like in the future?
We'll be the same with different tools or different objects. Or even it was very nice what you said about learning about this kind of ideology from YouTube. I had a very interesting experience yesterday in the metro because there are 4 gypsy girls from Bosnia who were pickpocketing, and the metro was calling, please pay attention to these girls, they are gonna try to steal you or stuff like that. And then they came and sit just next to me, so I started to talk with them, and they were switching from Romanian, from Bosnian. It was a bit that also some words were Romanian, but I know the gypsies might travel and bring words here and there. Switching from French to German to English to some other languages in between, and I asked them, where did you learn German? From YouTube. And why did you learn it? I like how it sounds. The other one was not able to speak so well German. She was speaking better French, so because she liked how that sound. So that's what I would like to, how I like to close.
But regarding meaning, I think it's important with a game that meaning is created with the players. So each time the game is played, there's a different meaning that starts from this topic that we suggested for debate, and then each time meaning may be different because of the players are different. They have different experiences and biases regarding planned economics, and I think that's what's very important right now. Why we need planning games or games in general right now, because they can create this space for meaning to emerge.
And it was actually precisely that we played so differently, all of us, so it was actually interesting in our iteration.
There is a question there.
Yeah, thanks. Really interesting. I'm curious about. Well, you talked about the fact that in the Eastern Bloc there was poor on data, and then less online, sort of compared to current AI, etc., which is at least to some degree richer on data, but perhaps in some of the same models. So of course that makes me curious about how would you compare, Eastern Bloc cybernetics to what's going on, in platforms, in AI, in also platform economy, and which is also of course larger parts of sort of neoliberal or neoliberal economies, ways of controlling the public sector, where your message, I work in a university, I know all about this, the way we are measured on certain outputs, in a way, it sounded pretty much like my university, what you were describing.
That was actually somehow our aim, and we are explaining actually in the text, the small text that we sent. It's something that might apply to every hierarchical structure, more or less. And as we said, it's also to question why we need to look into the past and what we can learn from the past. We might find the same, can we try to not replicate the same mistakes? That's a good question. That would be probably, and if they're the same model, the model have variations, but the question is how might be aware that's just a variation and to pay attention to what exactly is the model and can we actually change and to pay attention what's exactly there.
So just to add to that, maybe to the questions related to data and data poverty versus data richness. Not all Soviet societies were data poor in the sense that I, for instance, define them. As a matter of fact, Soviet cybernetics failed. So Romania copied the cybernetic project from the Soviet Union, and just about the same time in the 1960s. And by the end of the 1970s, both of them failed. They were repressed by the politicians, by the nomenclatura. But interestingly enough, they failed in opposite ways. Whereas Vladimir Glushkov, who was the mathematician based in Kiev that ran the cybernetic project in the Soviet Union, actually tried to replace what would nowadays seem something very, very contemporaneous or modern, try to replace paper bureaucracy with a digital form of bureaucracy. And then they produced so much information, so much data, so much digitalized reports that they couldn't manage them. And they couldn't manage them because in contrast to how cybernetics, but not only cybernetics, but computer science was developing in the West, I'm simplifying, obviously. You should take them in quotation marks, but obviously in the West there was a decentralized sort of system in which everybody was encouraged to hold their own personal computer, and then that democratized access to computer technology. In the Soviet Union, everything was centralized because the secret services were afraid of any element of dissent. So they tried to concentrate all computing power within centers of calculation, which happened all over the Soviet world, right? So they were jammed by so much information. And you have that discussion about the big data nowadays, about AIs, which are not very sophisticated mathematically, actually, but very powerful technologically instruments or devices, if you want. You have the same discussion about big data and how you are overwhelmed with data and what's meaningful from the data and how you need to run and run and run again in order to get some signal out of that, some meaning, if you want, a non-statistical jargon. And I think that discussion simplifies the whole spectrum. It doesn't represent the whole spectrum because when you talk about data practices and environments, you also have to look at those at the other end of the spectrum, where you don't have data. And that was the Romanian case, and this is what I think it can teach us. When you don't have data, not because you don't have enough quantities of data, but because data is it's collected and simplified and worked on and presented only in synthetic form and kept from being published, so that you can only work with insignificant amount of data. And then how do you run computers on no data at all? Or mathematical models for that matter. It doesn't have to be computers. It can be statistical models, but still ran on data that was so much worked on that any significant meaning was extracted out of it or simply simplified so you don't have several hypotheses to be tested, but actually the same meaning to be extracted again and again and again, like in a loop, right? And that's the end of my intervention. It's a quotation from Egon Balázs, one reputed mathematician that escaped Romania after doing time in prison and so on, and he made it big in the United States, where he got the von Neumann Medal for contributions to operations research, which is another name for mathematical economics. And he told me, while in the mid-1960s, when I emigrated, I spent some time in Italy, and then I was interacting with Sovietologists at congresses, and I was telling them, in the West, you have lots of data, and all of those data are used by people to contradict previously published stories. That's the meaning of academia. You don't get it. In the East, it's the opposite, or the other way around, as Stalin used to put it. We have new and new data being produced just to validate the previously issued stories by the propaganda, by the party. So any new data set has been thoroughly processed in order to support the story. So it's the same story again and again, like in a loop. It's nothing new. Thank you.
I think that's it. Thank you very much. I have to close though because I'm leading the panel. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope we were on point in the end, quite good. Thank you.
Thank you.